Welcome, everybody, to this first installment of our Lift Every Voice Contemplative Writers of Color Book Club, sponsored by Abbey of the Arts. And this is our first episode in the series. We're hoping to read and reflect on a book a month for at least this forthcoming year, maybe longer, depending on how our enthusiasm continues. But I'm excited to continue to dive into these rich voices. And essentially, Abbey of the Arts is committed to really cultivating this Christian tradition of contemplative practice and mysticism. And at least in the Western Church, so much of it has been developed from the voices of European mystics. And I've been wondering a lot lately how we might expand this vision. Certainly part of the dominant conversation happening, certainly in the United States and certainly elsewhere as well. Even in Ireland, we're certainly having that conversation as well. And so we're going to be exploring a number of different books, some from more historical figures like Howard Thurman and Nicholas Black Elk, and then some more modern writers like Claudia, who I'll introduce here in a second, and Austin Channing Brown and Christina Cleveland. So I'm really excited that Claudia said yes to me when I extended this invitation to her to be in conversation over this series. Because I've admired Claudia's work and her writing for many years. We've been connected online. We haven't met ever in person, so it's, a true virtual friendship, but we have a lot in common. I know Claudia has a great love for particularly the Benedictine monastic tradition, and she also has a wildly creative streak in her and does a lot of creative arts facilitation. So between those two, we are kindred spirits. So welcome, Claudia. I'm so happy to be embarking on this journey with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just to share a little bit about my background, I came to Jesus when I was 15 years old in a charismatic Church of God in Christ. Way back in the day, the Church of God in Christ and the Assemblies of God Church were like one.
Mm-hmm.
But then we separated, and so the Black people became Church of God in Christ. And what did I say?
The Assemblies of God, and yeah.
Assemblies of God. Oh, my middle-aged brain, y'all. Y'all can work with me. Just work with me. Anyway, so that was my conversion. I I went to so many different churches when I was young, trying to find a Jesus that would stay with me. I know there was this idea that God is with me, and I wanted more of that. I
Mm.
just, I don't know, I was still hungry. No matter what was on the table, spiritually, I was still hungry. And I was seeking my true spiritual home. I ended up at the vineyard one day, and Phyllis Tickle was there.
Oh,
She
lovely.
was visiting, and she was, praying for people. And she mentioned the Eucharist. And suddenly I saw Jesus in this very different way. I saw Jesus as available and that you can taste him, that
Mm.
he comes into your body.
Mm.
So that was the Jesus that I wanted. And I wanted a church that didn't seem to stumble and fracture. So I went to what I thought was the most original Christian experience, and I became Eastern Orthodox.
Oh, I didn't know this part. Yeah.
But the Orthodox Church was, kind of stern. and, you know, unforgiving. Uh, and it was very ethnic, and the ethnicity was not my own.
Right.
There was this group that we met once a year, and it was called Ancient Christianity and African Americans. And that became a focal point of how the suffering of African Americans relates to the sufferings of the saints. So that was a kind of glorious experience, even though on my regular Sunday morning church experience, it was very Russian. So pretty soon I started to, and like Teresa, I loved books. So I just started to read more contemplative books, and it brought me right to the Catholic Church because I identified with those writers. I didn't identify with the writers in the Eastern Church. Maybe one or two writers, but so Phyllis Tickle kind of lit a fire in me to go after the Eucharist, and not just communion, not just, here's a little symbol, but I was really tasting God in this experience. So I remain a Catholic, but I'm really bad at it. And my priest is so tolerant. He's young and African American and Filipino, and he just tolerates me. Yeah, so I'm still a Catholic, but I'm bad at it. I'm also a little bit witchy. So,
Yeah, I love that too.
so that is who I am. And I think I just love, and this is one thing I loved about the Catholic Church. The most thing that I loved was the Eucharist. But second, all of the beautiful rituals in the church and the experiences. What I learned from the evangelical Pentecostal tradition is that God is real. God is a God you can actually feel.
Yeah.
But in the Catholic Church, I learned that God is in you in a very personal way. So that's my story.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, before I launch into asking you more about Saint Teresa of Avila and your wonderful book that we're focusing on here, God Alone is Enough, I wanted to maybe ask you just a little bit about your career as a writer and as an expressive arts practitioner, just to give our listeners a little sense of the kind of fullness of who you are, and some of that creative expression that brings you to life.
Thank you. I've wanted to write since I was a little girl. I was walking in the hall, and I think I was in the 5th grade, walking in the hall in my elementary school, and I saw a piece of paper on the floor folded. I don't know what made me stop and pick that paper that had nothing to do with me up. So I picked it up, and it was a play. Somebody had written like dialogue for a play. And suddenly I was like, I can do that. I became a writer in that moment in the 5th grade. So, I would do what I can. Like as a teenager, I wrote angsty teenage stories. And when I was, I also wrote bad poetry as a teenager, as most of us do. Everybody's got a bad poem in them. I believe that. So I started my writing career, actually, as much as I wanted to write from the time I was a kid, I didn't do it. I didn't feel worthy, especially after, I had my conversion at 15, but I didn't feel a lot of the time that I was worthy to have these experiences with God because my life was so raggedy. By the time I was married to a drug addict, I just didn't feel like the Christian writers that I wanted to be like. I was married to an addict. I was poor. You know,
Mm-hmm.
we got food stamps,
Mm-hmm.
and I was underemployed. I was
Mm-hmm.
also bipolar and not medicated.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, that affected my whole life. It affected my marriage, and it affected how I raised my children.
Yeah.
It was not good. It wasn't great for me to be a chronically depressed mother. And in 2005, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So I became a Christian writer. One day, my husband needed to have surgery. And
Mm.
we were so poor in our minds that we couldn't think of anybody to ask to take him to the hospital and bring him back. So we took the bus. We took the bus to his surgery. And when they wheeled him back, I went to sit down and I saw an issue of Today's Christian Woman. And I had read Today's Christian Woman for years, and it never had a Black person, and or not that I could see. And suddenly there's this Black woman on the cover of Today's Christian Woman. So I stole that magazine from the hospital, and I held it to my heart. And I said, Jesus, if you just let me write for you, I will tell people like me that you love them.
Wow.
And so that is how I started writing. And then I thought, it's never going to happen. I don't fit the profile. I don't homeschool my kids. I'm not married to the priest or the
Mm-hmm.
pastor with the little white church on the hill. I just didn't feel like the people I was aspiring to be like. But that changed because I started a blog because I didn't have anything to lose. And
Mm-hmm.
blogging was like the hot new thing at
Yeah,
that
I
time.
remember back then.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so I started my blog where I can just be honest about my difficult, often, and sometimes glorious experiences with God. You know, despite being poor, despite being Black, marginalized,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to share what
Yeah.
I was going through. I
Yeah.
called it Ragamuffin Diva because I felt like I am definitely of the ragamuffin camp, but also I am made in the image of God, and you can't take that away from a human.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how Ragamuffin Diva started. I blogged for about 4 or 5 months when one of my followers, and who also became a dear friend, she told her publisher about me. So one day he sends an email and he said, "Would you write for us?" It was Don Pape, and it was Waterbrook Press. So this was a big deal. Who gets the email out of nowhere saying, will you write for us? And I was just I was just blogging. He didn't
Yeah.
even know if I could write fiction or not. I
Wow.
I
Yeah.
wasn't really great at that.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a bad time for me and my family. And yeah, I don't think I was working at that time because the fibromyalgia was really bad at that
Yeah.
time. So I told him, yeah, I can write a book. And he says, what is it about? And I said, and all I could think of is, what am I doing? Which was a whole lot of nothing. And I said, we were watching CSI on VHS because we couldn't afford cable. And so I said, it's a mystery with forensic stuff. Honestly, I was pulling stuff out of the air. I had no idea what I was talking about. And I studied psychology at the master's level, but I didn't graduate because I had a high risk pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
right at the end, right one semester before I got the degree. And so I never went back. So I said, and she's a psychologist. you know, that's like I'm still connected to CSI, addicted to it. I said, she's a forensic psychologist. And I said, and she has a romance with a cop. And
And that was the doorway in, huh?
he went for it. He was
Yeah.
like, all right, that sounds good. Just send me some chapters. And I told my friend Mary Griffith that she's also a wonderful writer. I said, Mary, I don't have a book. She was like, you better get to writing. And I wrote, this is how I wrote Murder, Mayhem, and a Fine Man, the first of my Amanda Bell Brown mystery series. I wrote him as a man that I used to be in love with, you know, like this is a really hot guy who I used to be in love with. And so I was like, they're going to be, and he was biracial. So I thought I could get the Black audience and the white audience.
Really clever. And that was the start of a whole series of books, wasn't it?
Yeah, actually, I would get these crazy ideas and people would just let me do it. So, you know, I made up all of that stuff at a whim. And then I had to write those mysteries. And so one day, me and a friend were talking about demons, and I saw this book called The Demon Chaser or something like that. And I said to my friend, I want to write a book about being a demon chaser. And I said she would be a teenager and she would be Black and she would call herself, and then I said, the Exorcister. And me and my friend just howled with laughter because it was such a funny, you know, the Exorcist. We just laughed. And I told somebody that, and he was like, write that. So then I had to write the Exorcist series. And at some point, Nav Press, that's who I wrote. I started my Amanda Bell Brown series at Nav Press. They decided the third book, even though you get a letter from your publisher when you turn your book in, and they said, okay, this is acceptable. We'll take it. Here's, you know, sign your thing and there you go. It's coming out to the world. So the second Amanda Brown mystery had just come out, and we were sending ARCs as the third one. And we were just finishing up the edits when I got a call from the president of Nav Press, the publisher himself. And he said, your books are too sexy for the Christian market. I told you I had that hot guy in it, but I didn't have sex in it. I had people who just wanted sex, but they said no.
That unrequited.
Well, no, it was, they wanted it together, but they also wanted to please God. Yeah. So I had the Song of Solomon longing for that kind of intimacy, but they said no because we want to do the right thing. Yeah. And I thought, this is the book I wish I had, you know, this is the book I wish I had to read. Yeah. It would have Black people that are smart, not stereotypical. Right. They would be funny, and funny things would happen. So there's this strong element of humor in all of my books. But anyway, that's how I got in the Christian market. They canceled my Amanda Bell Brown series. They pulled out all the books that they could, and they told me I had to pay the advance back. So I paid them $10,000 back. Wow. Because I signed with Simon & Schuster while all of this happened. But I was really hurt when they canceled my books. But unbelievably, Simon & Schuster bought all 6 of my books. And while I was waiting for this drama to play out, Don Pape, who was no longer a publisher, he became an agent. He said, okay, I'm going to be your agent, and you know, we'll sell your books. And he said, I want you to write a race book. And I didn't know what a race book was. I didn't know what he was talking about. But he was like, write me a race book. So I made the characters of Zora and Nikki. She was Black and he was white. And how they go through all of these challenges to be together. A lot of racist things happen, a lot of microaggressions, but I thought it was a really important book. And it was nominated for a Christie Award and a Carol Award.
Wonderful.
Those are like the top
Yeah.
Christian writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to make sure to get to Teresa of Avila now. I think we should dive into that book, because that's the focus of our book this month, God Alone is Enough. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about, how Teresa of Avila, called to you in particular, and, kind of what was the door that she broke open in you, and what did you discover about her? How did she meet you in that, whatever season of life you were in when you were writing this book?
Well, I think what happened was my spirituality shifted. And even though I was at churches now and experiencing the Eucharist, I still wanted more. I still felt a longing for Jesus that just would not go away. Even though in the midst of that longing, sometimes God would become so present and so palpable to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved St. John of the Cross.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that he spoke about God like love poetry.
Yeah.
And when I wrote Wounded, that was kind of my love song to people who feel that desire. Wounded was about a kind of a ghetto woman that gets stigmata.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had quotes from St. John of the Cross in that book, and I just got closer to him. So it wasn't anything mystical unless it was on John's side, but John wrote to me one day and he said, yeah, we're done a series about the saints, but it's geared to Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to write one. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, because anybody who asked me to write a book and pay me, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am. Anyway, I said, well, I'll write about St. John of the Cross. And he was like, too dour, no.
Oh, funny. Yeah.
And so I said, well, what about Teresa of Avila? And he was like, okay, you do that one. And so this is when I opened my heart to a greater way to St. Teresa. She was like John's best friend, like the funny one. She teased him about his height. And what I liked about Teresa was I could really relate to her. Like she loved romance novels. I love Hallmark movies. Inexplicably, I really love Hallmark movies. And I like romance novels too. She liked attention. So do I. And she loved God fiercely and ecstatic, like she had ecstasy.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of experience with God that I wanted. So that all came out. I should tell you that my first draft of this was terrible. Because I was hiding behind Teresa's words, there was almost none of me in the book.
Yeah. I think that happens a lot for writers when they're.
And I was like, ooh. So John said, people need a reliable guide to get them through all of her esoteric teachings.
Yeah.
And we need to see more of you in the book and how you relate to her teachings. So in further drafts, I did put some of my spiritual experiences in it. And now I'm glad I did. And before I got the book, my physical copy, I realized that they had used a collage, like a vision board, that I put on my blog, they took the vision board and they made it like the headers.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I noticed those. I wondered where those came from.
I
Yeah,
thought, wow, that was a cool thing to do. They didn't
yeah.
even ask me for permission to do that. But yeah. And
Sometimes it's better to just seek forgiveness, right?
and I need to say this as a woman of color, as a Black woman,
Yeah.
that just about every publisher that I had struggled when it came to the book cover. And it was like, if we put a Black person on the cover,
Mm-hmm.
what is our white audience? What are they, how are they going to respond? If a
Mm-hmm.
Black woman is on the cover, will they buy this?
Yeah.
And truthfully, a lot of people wouldn't, because they would feel like, oh, that's a Black lady, and well, she can't tell the story of Saint Teresa. She
Yeah.
needs to be a scholar. She needs to be a white man.
Yeah.
And
It's
I wasn't.
Yeah, what's so emblematic of our expectation, that you put a white person on the cover and they're supposed to be the universal representation. You put a Black person on the cover and it's supposed to only be to that audience. And so,
Exactly.
yeah.
So there are secret meetings in just about every publisher, but I am so pleased. And I wasn't a part of these secret meetings. So
Yeah.
um,
I know the publishers don't often let you in on those conversations.
so they have this beautiful woman who
Yeah.
looks like she is just so deeply in prayer. And
Hmm.
I love it. She's got cowrie shells from Africa in her hair. She's not all dressed up. And it seemed like a cover that should be on a book that I wrote.
Hmm.
Um,
And I love this sense of humor that you weave. You talked earlier about how everything you do, like, you always bring your humor to it. And uh, I love that you're a reliable guide and you're also like someone just that I want to get to know better just from your sense of humor and your sense of like spiritedness and your just like your obvious love of life in the book. And so I just wonder, like, you said that this was geared more towards kind of a Protestant community, and did you have kind of your reader in mind, particularly coming from that evangelical background yourself, and were you
always.
sort of imagining like like come see there's some riches over here and the kind of
Exactly. I was always aware of my audience.
Mhm.
I mean, I knew some people, some high church people would read it.
Yeah.
Um, Father James Martin endorsed it, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I have no idea how wonderful things come to me. They just fall on my happy little head. So I knew that a lot this was geared toward Protestants. So I made it in a way that I felt was relatable,
Mm-hmm.
that was gentle, that
Mm-hmm.
was a conversational style. Well,
Mm-hmm.
the conversational, that's just how I write. So I wanted to kind of lure them and let them know this is not spooky,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little spooky at the end, but this is something for you too. You
Yeah.
don't have to be afraid of the saints. They were just holy people having experiences with God. Teresa was like me. She
Yeah.
was struggling with chronic illness. She
Yeah.
had trouble with prayer sometimes. She was a
Mhm.
woman writer that in a world that wasn't always friendly to what she had to say. She was also a reluctant writer. She didn't feel worthy, and I felt those same things. So that kind of how I wrote that first novel. John asked me to write it, and after St. John, she was my second choice.
Oh, that's really a beautiful story. I love that. Yeah, can you maybe talk a little bit more about your journey with chronic illness and particularly how Saint Teresa sort of maybe helped met you in that place? I mean, as someone with chronic illness myself, I totally understand how that shapes like every aspect of your outlook on life and is a whole other doorway into that kind of sense of humility and surrender sometimes. Sometimes I've often not obviously not desired, but still the reality.
Yeah, I am not only chronically ill with fibromyalgia, I also have mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
and I take medicine for both of those things. When I started writing with chronic illness, I just wanted to, and I used to say this like Mother Teresa, I just wanted to do something beautiful for God. And I probably wrote all of my books in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
At a desk now that I barely use except for Zoom meetings, because I write in my bed. Usually by the time I get to a point where I have a few moments to write, by that time I'm in a lot of pain. So
Yeah.
I'm in bed. My husband was kind of hostile about
Mm.
my frequent illnesses. And, he'd say, passive aggressive things like, "You're always sick." And I was
Mm-hmm.
always sick.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought he was mean about it.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't accepting, and one day, after he had said something like, "I'm always sick," and I had several books out at this time, I wrote a list of things that I did in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And that made me feel like, okay, I'm not just this worthless, sick person. One time, Phyllis Tickle, I was discouraged. I didn't like who I was. I wasn't like the people writing Christian books. And one day she said, "Your experiences are why you write the way you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you didn't have these experiences, you wouldn't write about these things." And I wrote pretty much everything for people who struggled to believe that God was with them. And
Mm-hmm.
this was like the St. Teresa book. This was the way I could say it much more explicitly than I could
Yeah.
in my novels.
Yeah. Well, and just the transparency that you give about some of your own struggles in this book, it does make me feel like, oh, like I could see, especially somebody kind of new to this whole pathway, feeling just this wonderful sense of consolation, and like somebody understands who they are and what they're really struggling with. It's really a beautiful gift. I wonder if there's a passage that you might want to read aloud for us from the book.
Yeah, like a couple of them.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. I want to read St. Teresa's advice for beginners and
Mm-hmm.
failures in prayer. I think this is a good transition of
Yeah.
ragamuffinness. Um, St. Teresa's advice for beginners and failures in prayer. The Lord told me, "Get started as best you can. You will see what I can do." Oh, my friends, how well I have seen it. How
Mm.
you begin is all important. Only with resolute determination will you preserve to the end of the journey. Come what may, happen what may, whatever work is involved, whatever criticism arises, whether you arrive or die on the road, with courage or without it, even if the whole world collapses, pray.
Mm. I love that idea. Like how you begin is all that matters. The way
Mhm.
that you, yeah, enter into whatever it is that you're wanting to do. Yeah, that's really beautiful. I wonder if I'm thinking about, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the metaphors that Teresa uses for the life of prayer. I know the two main ones are the inner garden and the inner castle, and particularly, how they might speak to readers today. And I'm kind of curious too if, especially the castle imagery, I think, because the garden imagery, I think we probably can still relate to, but yeah, kind of how you see that. Maybe just talk a little bit about those two images. And
Um, I think, I mean, Teresa, like Jesus, really needed to break things down
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's relatable. Now, this was a very different society and time. Then, they couldn't just go to the grocery store
Mm-hmm.
and there were 40 different types of toothpaste.
Mm-hmm.
So a garden was really relatable.
Yeah.
That rough, hard ground that is often, the things going on in our head, has to be broken down and tended to, and then you can plant the seeds that will grow into virtue and more grace.
Mm-hmm.
So, and here's the thing: nobody finds God. God finds you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even begin a spiritual journey unless God prompts you to.
Mm-hmm.
So, like at the end of the garden metaphor, Jesus was the gardener.
Mm-hmm.
And our spirituality, starts with God. The fact is, we are always in God. God never leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to, like rough and tough soil, we have to find the way that we can remember that God
Mm-hmm.
is always with us, that God is always in us. That scripture, in him we live and move and have our being.
Mm-hmm.
That is the absolute truth. We are in him. We move in him. Uh, we're never without God. We
Mm-hmm.
are never, ever without God, but we don't remember that. So we go
Yeah.
through all of these things to find the God that was with us all along.
I love that kind of idea that the journey is kind of back to where we began, but seeing it with new eyes. Yeah, kind of coming back. Yeah. Did you have another passage you wanted to read there?
I think you had in your questions the opening prayer
Yeah, yeah.
from silly devotions and sullen states. I mean, let me do it again. From silly devotions and sullen saints, deliver me, O Lord.
It's a brilliant prayer.
we, we make God so complicated,
Hmm.
so many things, rituals and feelings and doctrines. And honestly, being with God is really simple.
Hmm.
So we've got all of these churches and all of these ways to touch God, and that's just how it is. And God is so tough to some people. Like
Hmm.
God is always ready to kick your butt. And somebody told me Jesus did not come to kick your, and then there was a word that I won't say here. You just got to think, okay, you're like worried about, are you going to go to hell? And God is like, I just want to love you. I just
Yeah,
want to be here for you. I don't want to send you to hell. I don't want to
yeah,
beat you up.
yeah, yeah. I find that kind of focus in prayer and a faith life of only on the hereafter and how do I ensure my place in heaven misses the whole point of a God who is, alive and well and moving through our lives with such delight and joy and passion right in this very moment. And yeah, and it's kind of what the incarnation is all about. And
Mhm.
that sense of yeah, just that, how do we remember that God is always here with us? Sometimes it's obviously harder than other times,
Mhm.
but that yeah. Can we go back for a moment to we were talking earlier about your novels and sort of that erotic kind of longing, and so I wondered if you could talk a little bit, because Teresa, you mentioned a little bit about her ecstasy, uh, but I think maybe for some readers that might be, you know, a little bit of a tricky area, you know, this very kind of passionate erotic language for God, especially in this culture where we kind of have a lot of ambivalence around sexuality and have very, very mixed messages. So I wonder how you read that in Teresa and in your own life. Like, how does that kind of erotic passion, yeah, how does that bring you closer to God, and what does that, you know, what does that bring alive in you?
Uh, First, I'll say that men tend to have more of a problem with
Yeah.
metaphor. And they're like, look, I'm the bride. What? Uh, so that's one thing.
Hmm.
And how Teresa's ecstasy, and I wrote the line from what is that movie with Billy Crystal and I can't even think of her name. I'm sorry. I'm on this medicine. It makes me forget stuff.
It's okay.
When
Yeah.
Harry Met Sally,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're at that restaurant, and
Right.
she's acting like she's in ecstasy, and
Hmm.
then the lady sitting nearby says, "I'll have what she's having."
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so after I wrote about this ecstasy, these wonderful experiences with God that were so visceral that Saint Teresa experienced, uh, I remember John and I having a conversation, and he said, "We can't put that line in the book." It's like it's from When Harry Met Sally. It's like it's the famous line from that
Yeah.
movie, and so I was like, no, because it was so sexual. All of the terminology is sexual.
Hmm.
Um, when I wrote this, God was my beloved. He was my husband. Um, that was kind of a metaphor that I lived by. Like John of the Cross, you know, sometimes he seemed absent and I sought him. And if John of the Cross was, as John said, dour, well, Teresa would come in the room, fling the drapes open, and say, "Get some sun in here." What are you doing?
That's a great image. Yeah.
Yeah. So this image, this very with this very sexual language, and you got to remember, she was a romance junkie.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it seems like a natural progression for her to see Christ as the beloved.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that's what I wanted. That's what I was looking for. I wanted all the Jesus I can get, and
Mm-hmm.
so everywhere I went, I sought him. If I couldn't find him, I'd go someplace else.
Yeah. Well, and I think it encourages us to not be so afraid of that passion that we all experience, and to know that ultimately what our heart is passionate for is God, even if we call it something else, or maybe we go through a lot of our lives not even realizing that that's what we're longing for, and we go down other pathways. But it's a beautiful honoring of that, yeah, that desire and passion that we might carry.
I'm going to read
Yeah.
Being with the Beloved,
Yeah.
the prayers. And by the way, I was so scared of writing this book and St. Teresa. And like I said, I hid behind her words. So my first draft was mostly Teresa's words. He made me tell it in my own language. He was like, you have to write the modifications to make this accessible.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too, because the I love the translations of her words feel really fresh, and I wondered if those all came directly from you in
Yep.
that process. Yeah, yeah.
I had to translate. I had no experience at doing that. So here is what I call a rest stop on this journey, and
Hmm.
it's called Being with the Beloved.
Mm.
And so I wrote some instructions that Teresa had. Oh, first, let me say my favorite thing that Teresa said. Like someone was asking her, you know, desperately, how do you pray? What do you do? And she said, do whatever works.
Mm.
Kind of my spirituality right now, whatever
Yeah.
whatever gets you in God. remembering you're in God, that's what you do. So
Mm-hmm.
this is Teresa's easy instructions for being with the beloved. Place yourself in the presence of Christ. Don't wear yourself out thinking. Simply speak with your beloved. Delight in him. Lay your needs at his feet. Acknowledge that he doesn't have to allow you to be in his presence, but he does. There's a time for thinking and a time for being. Be with him.
Mm. That's beautiful. I love that. It reminds me of Ecclesiastes, the time, a time for different things, and yeah, a time for thinking, a time for being. We tend to overthink our spiritual lives an awful lot, don't we? And
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
just do whatever works. like, like God, what a relief that is.
Exactly. Exactly.
You don't have to overthink it and figure it out. Yeah, yeah. I love at the in the afterword of your book, you say that your greatest hope is that Teresa's teachings ignite a burning desire in you to pray. They certainly fanned a flame in me. It's my sincere hope that if you were Saint Leary before reading this book, you are now open now to the spiritual delights and wisdom our heavenly friends have to offer. It's such a beautiful just kind of summary of the journey that you took us on. And I wonder if that desire has deepened or shifted in any way, or like now that you wrote the book several years ago, so kind of where are you in your relationship with Teresa and the saints now? And yeah.
I feel like I've got a team.
Mm-hmm.
And Team Claudia has the saints.
Yeah.
It has my great grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
It has the ancestors. It has angels.
Yeah.
And I believe these helpers
Yeah.
get me through everything.
Yeah.
And I pray like to the saints. And sometimes I'll talk to my dad. I I believe in a beautiful, peaceful afterlife. And so I can't believe that this is all there is. And then
Mm-hmm.
you die and you cease to exist. So I believe in the existence of these beings that are no longer embodied.
Mm-hmm.
I believe in angels who, may not have had bodies like we did, but when they
Mm-hmm.
manifest to us, like in the Bible, you can see them. And I believe in the ancestors because you would not be here except for a succession of people, of love, of relationships that brought you into being. So
Yeah.
that's my spiritual team. And as for what I believe at this point, in a lot of ways, I'm still Ragamuffin Diva.
Mm-hmm.
I do, like anyone else, struggle with spirituality. I have my bad days and my good days, the days I feel close to God and the days I don't feel God at all. And I also realize the diva part where I am a divine creation and
Mm-hmm.
God loves me and never, ever leaves me.
Mm, that's
When,
so beautiful. Yeah.
and
I love Team Claudia, I have to say, because I have a Team Christine, but I haven't called it that yet, but I may start calling it.
yeah, that's my spiritual team.
Yeah.
I was gonna say something, I don't remember. Okay,
That's
what's next?
okay. Well, I think mainly what I want to kind of close on too is just acknowledging that, we're in a very tumultuous time. I think we're probably always in a tumultuous time, but right now, this is being recorded during a pandemic and of course, huge um, uprisings in the United States, violent, assaults on the Capitol building, and of course, all the um, increased awareness around the deep kind of history of racism in the US in particular, but other places as well.
Yeah.
So I really wonder, obviously St. Teresa lives in a very different time, of course, with her own kind of tumult. And I wonder what her wisdom is for us through you, through your lens. What what is possible in a world that has such deep divisions in it. And, what do you think that she would want us to know? And what do you want us to know?
Um, First of all, I want every reader to know that I appreciate them being on the journey with me.
Mm,
I believe that Teresa would very prayerfully deal with this situation. I do think she would be an activist. I
mhm,
think Teresa would be involved with Black Lives Matter.
mhm,
I think she would. I think she would accept trans people
mhm,
and gay people. I think she would. I mean, she was ahead of her time.
mhm,
Being a woman writer in her day was just like unheard of.
mhm.
And I think she would be before her time if she were here now.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think she would teach us how to love, how to serve, and sometimes how to, in the absurdity, make you laugh.
Yeah, yeah. I think we could use a lot of that these days as well. Just that sense. I've been aware how heavy things feel and how much I need to consciously cultivate some joy and laughter each day just to remember, I think that ragamuffin diva image that so beautifully holds the tension of all of our lives of, how difficult things can be sometimes and struggle and also that there is grace, at every turn and every moment. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Are you working on any other book right now, or what are your creative projects? Is there anything kind of new on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I wrote a book that kind of goes deep into the legend of the Flying Africans.
Hmm.
Um, this is the story goes back to when Black people were slaves. And sometimes through their suffering, they would suffer so profoundly that they would sprout wings and fly back home to Africa.
Mm,
So the story is about a 16-year-old girl who is at the cusp of mental illness. She's had anxiety all her life. After she lost her mother when she was 3. She's had anxiety, she's depressed, and at the 16-year-old age, she begins to have symptoms of bipolar disorder.
mm,
And she reads this poem about her dad told her that her mother flew away. And so she had this obsession with these flying Africans when she turned 16 and
mm,
she had her first period. And she was longing for a mother. So the book is her quest to find her mother that flew away.
mm,
It's with an agent right now. She
mhm,
just wants me to make it longer.
mhm.
So she's been waiting on my, revisions since last year. But yeah, last year was quite a year. So,
Yeah, it was quite a year, and we've already had quite a year so far, and we're only a
right.
few days in. So, yeah, although that's wonderful to hear. It's something to look forward to. Well, thank you so much, Claudia. It's been really such a treat. It makes me so excited for this whole year of conversation with you, but especially this our focus this month, God Alone is Enough, a spirited journey with Saint Teresa of Avila. And we hope that you will join us at Abbey of the Arts on our website and our private Facebook group for continued conversation. And yeah, Claudia, I'm looking forward to all of our future conversations. So
Me
thanks.
too.
Mm,
May I read the closing prayer?
yeah, please do. That would be perfect.
I read this for Sarah Bessie's uh, group. She had a book
Mhm.
club too and featured my book. And as I was reading and trying to sound really spiritual and deep, my cat jumped on me,
Uh-huh.
dropped my camera. And it's like, see, that's what you get. Trying to sound all spiritual.
I love it.
So if I get attacked by a cat or the
Well,
ceiling
no.
caves in, that's what happened. So the closing prayer of Saint Teresa, and me too. May His Majesty always keep you in His hands and make you a great saint. May the light of God's Spirit illuminate me, this miserable woman so lacking in humility, who's been so bold as to take on the task of putting such sublime things into words. And may it please the Lord that I have not made a mistake in writing this, although surely I have. I've always hoped through me God would receive some praise. This is what I begged him for many years. Since I haven't offered him the praise with my own actions, I've dared to offer this account to you as an example of his great mercy. The Lord is all powerful and can hear me if he wants. Hear me, Lord. Do not allow this soul to be lost, your majesty. You have employed so much ingenuity in so many different circumstances to save my soul over and over. You have pulled me back from the abyss and brought me home to you. For this, I am so grateful. Amen. That's what
Amen.
Teresa left us with.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Claudia. That's a perfect way to end.
Thank you for inviting me to this. This is amazing.
Yeah, I'm really excited.